Good morning, church family. I hope all are well. I want to talk to you just a few minutes this morning about one of God's precious gifts to us. And that gift is the sense of humor that we have within us. That sense of humor comes in so handy at times where we really need something to help relieve stress or pain that we're experiencing. A number of our members are going through harder times right now than maybe others. But still, when we go through those times together, a sense of humor helps us so much. I commend Jason to you this morning, which I wouldn't necessarily do a lot. That's just a joke, Jason. Jason preaches sermons so well. He is able to lead song services so well. And there's just so many things about him that I could commend to you. But this morning I want to commend to you his sense of humor and his ability to use humor to illustrate or to give a better example of points that he's striving to make within his lesson. And I'd like to tell you that that sense of humor and the use of it is something that we can find in Scripture. There's a couple of places in Scripture that I am particularly fond of, and as I look at those passages, I'm going to try to read them in a sense of humor fashion. Forgive me if I don't do that very well. I'm not proficient in that area. One of the two areas I'm looking at is in 1 Kings, the 18th chapter. This is when Elijah was addressing the need for the children of Israel to get back to the one and true God. They were straying off to Baal. And Elijah said, you've got to make up your mind and do one or the other. And I suggest, or I propose, that we have a contest to see which God is the more powerful God. And we're all familiar with that time where he, on Mount Carmel, has those 450 prophets of Baal meet with him, and he's the only prophet of Jehovah that's there. And the idea is that they're going to take a calf each, cut it up, put it on the wood, on the altar, and pray for their God to come down and consume it with fire. So he has the prophets of Baal go first. And so they start early in the morning, and they start asking their God to come down with fire and consume this altar or this sacrifice. And then after a while, he starts taunting them. This thing begins in verse 26. So they took the bull given them and prepared it. Then they called on the name of Baal from morning till noon. O Baal, answer us, they shouted. But there was no response. No one answered. And they danced around the altar that they had made. At noon, Elijah began to taunt them. Shout louder, he said. Surely he is God. Perhaps he's deep in thought, or busy, or traveling. Maybe he is sleeping and must be awakened. So they shouted louder and slashed themselves with swords and spears as was their custom, until their blood flowed. Midday passed, and they continued their frantic prophesying until the time of the evening sacrifice. But there was no response. No one answered. No one paid attention. The reason Elijah could do that was because he had every confidence that God would support him, that God would come in and show that he was God. And that was the purpose Elijah had in doing it, was to show that. So it is daring, I think, for anyone to do something like that unless they were confident that they weren't going to be held out there to ridicule or to embarrassment, which he was not. The other area that I'd like to look at as far as humor is in 2 Corinthians, the 11th chapter, starting with the 16th verse. And this is Paul. I think it's very interesting that Paul, as serious-natured as he was, and as serious as the business of preaching the gospel was, still had a sense of humor that comes through in this passage that just almost floors me. I am going to read the version from the Message because it really even illustrates it more than the NIV, which is the version I normally look at. Starting in verse 16. Let me come back to where I started, and don't hold it against me if I continue to sound a little foolish. Or, if you'd rather, just accept that I am a fool and let me rant on a little. I didn't learn this kind of talk from Christ. Oh, no. It's a bad habit I picked up from the three-ring preachers that are so popular these days. Since you sit there in the judgment seat, observing all these shenanigans, you can afford to humor an occasional fool who happens along. You have such admirable tolerance for impostors who rob your freedom, rip you off, steal you blind, put you down, even slap your face. I shouldn't admit it to you, but our stomachs aren't strong enough to tolerate that kind of stuff. Since you admire the egomaniacs of the pulpit so much, remember this is your old friend, the fool, talking. Let me try my hand at it. Do they brag of being Hebrews, Israelites, the pure race of Abraham? I'm their match. Are they servants of Christ? I can go them one better. I can't believe I'm saying these things. It's crazy to talk this way, but I started and I'm going to finish. Do you get the humor in that? I hope I didn't butcher it too badly, but it really struck me every time I see this passage just how much of a sense of humor Paul had and how he was able to use that humor to teach others. I hope that you can call upon the sense of humor that you have. As times are bad, as you have to wrestle with different things, I hope you can look to God and ask for his help in trying to humor yourself through this. We thank you so much for you being a part of our church family, and we just pray each day for you. Thank you.